The Liberal National Coalition won last month's New South Wales state election in a landslide, the scale of which has never been seen before in Australian politics. The size of the win has given the new Premier, Barry O'Farrell, a mandate on a broad range of issues and the confidence to challenge the Prime Minister on some of her key reforms. Barry O'Farrell joined me in the studio a short time ago. Barry O'Farrell, welcome to Lateline.
A pleasure.
Let's go first to the news today of the final makeup of the New South Wales Upper House. You'll now have to deal with the shooters, and the Christian Democrats are not Pauline Hanson, as looked possible. Did you breathe a sigh of relief when you heard that news?
Well, I think it's another example that you can never disagree with the electorate. I've been on the losing end of a number of state campaigns, and each time I've admitted the electorate's got it right. I think they got it right on this occasion. To fix this state, we need to work together. We need a parliament that's prepared to work together. We don't need people who would be divisive.
Well, how divisive do you think that the crossbenchers are going to be? How easy will they be to win over if Labor joins with the Greens to knock back your legislative agenda?
Well, we don't have a majority in the Upper House, but we do have a mandate. We're the first party to ever win 11 Upper House seats in one election in New South Wales. Now, that combined with the extraordinary majority we've been given in the Lower House certainly says that those policies, those plans we put forward should get through the Upper House. I'm not going to sell out our plans, our policies, our principles for minor parties. And I hear lots written in the Sydney Morning Herald about the shooters and fishers, their plans for national parks. It ain't on.
But you're going to need them. If the Labor and the Greens get together, you're going to need either one of those four on the crossbench.
We will need 2 votes to get our policies through. We don't intend to sell out either national parks or social policy in order to achieve that.
Well, first of all, there was Colin Barnett in Western Australia, then there was Ted Baillieu in Victoria, and now there's you. How much trouble do you collectively, a trio of Conservative premiers, present potentially for the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't think we're trouble. We're 3 individual premiers. And firstly, I suppose, there'll be issues upon which we don't agree. So, first and foremost, we are representatives of our states. And our states will have different priorities, different demands of federal government. But collectively, we operate in a federation. It is meant to be cooperative federalism. And once the elections are over, all of us, whether Prime Minister Gillard, Premier Barnett, Premier Baillieu, Premier Bligh, we're meant to operate in the best interests of our communities and of the nation.
But 3 sitting around that COAG table is a lot less lonely than 1 or even 2.
Well, absolutely a lot less lonely, but I'm not sure it changes the dynamic much because I know from when John Howard was Prime Minister, often he actually found it easy to work with premiers from the opposite party. I'm hopeful, given the benefits that in particular Colin Barnett has got out of Infrastructure Australia, that we might be able to replicate that in the relationship that we have with the federal government. I want to sit down with the Prime Minister. I want to advance the interests of this state. This is a state where we've been shortchanged and where I'm determined, for instance, to ensure that the current talk of budget cuts doesn't dud New South Wales again.
Well, there's not one state that wouldn't argue that they haven't been shortchanged. I know that you're sitting down with the Prime Minister, as I understand it, on Thursday for a cup of tea. What will be your priority? Well,
our priority is clearly the infrastructure backlog that New South Wales has, and whilst I accept that as a nation we've had many issues, what I don't accept is that Sydney, for instance, with 20% of the nation's population, got just 1% of funding under Infrastructure Australia's initial allocation. That was $90 million for a proposed metro out to Parramatta, and that money was handed back by the former government. So today Sydney came to a standstill because our signalling system's old. We clearly have massive problems in this city, as do other cities around the nation, and what I'm interested in talking to the Prime Minister about is how we get through that transport infrastructure backlog, and in particular how we get the funding for the rail link that everyone says is the first priority in Sydney.
That rail link, of course, is $2.1 billion that the federal government allocated to the Parramatta to Epping rail link. You don't want to go ahead with that. You want the money transferred instead to the North West rail link. Of course, that was your promise. It wasn't the government's promise, the federal government's promise. Why should they fund your promise?
Well, because firstly, by everybody, the Lord Mayor, the former Labor head of planning, by the Business Council, by the Centre for Independent Economics, that rail link will actually deliver the greatest benefits to this city, both in terms of rail, but also in terms of our road network.
But that would require the Prime Minister dumping another election promise.
Well, it would require the Prime Minister to pay respect to our mandate. Look, we know that the Epping to Parramatta link is a link that should be built. We've not axed it. We've simply said it has to be deferred to fix the infrastructure backlog, we have to prioritise. And what I'll be asking the Prime Minister to do is to respect the mandate we have, respect the fact that by building that North West Rail link, we'll deliver the greatest benefit to Sydney's road network for all of people.
What can you put on the table to deal? Because you've already had a no to that from both the Prime Minister and the Infrastructure Minister. Are you prepared to deal?
Well, I'm prepared to deal as long as it's in the interests of the people of this state. I'm prepared to deal so that we get a better outcome from the federal government than we've got over the past few years.
Support for pokies, perhaps?
No, because we have our commitments. One of the things, despite the $4.5 billion hole in our budget that was revealed after we came to office, we're determined to do is to deliver on the promises that we made. The problem, it seems to me, with the pre-commitment and the pokies is that the scheme that some independents want in Canberra hasn't yet been invented to deliver the outcomes that they're seeking. The fact is that we have a large number of clubs across this city, across this state, to do what they're asking to do. I understand the technology doesn't exist, and what I know from my own life is that if you want to cut down your food, if you want to do something about your drinking problem, if you want to do something about your gambling problem, it has to start in here first. You can't rely upon someone else doing it for you.
Don't you worry about problem gambling, though, to the extent...
Absolutely.
So what do you think should happen? You say, what, it's completely up to the individual?
No, what I say is that most people, for instance, manage to drink responsibly. There's a small number who don't, and we should be doing everything we can to assist those people. Equally, most people that go into our clubs, and our clubs provide an enormous range of services. So we're about to have Anzac Day. My local club, the Roseville Memorial Club, will not only host the dawn service, but will feed people that day from all over my suburbs by the use of volunteers in their kitchens with food for nothing. Now, what we should be aiming at is those people who do have problems, and I don't believe, Ali, that those people who have problems are the people that are likely to exclude themselves or commit to pre-commitment. They're the people we actually do need to focus on.
There is a perception, though, that you're in the pocket of the clubs. I mean, particularly if you look at not just the revenue that they raise for the state, but also that just before the election you agreed to tax breaks on poker machines. Well,
we sensibly agreed to tax breaks because, for instance, since Labor ratcheted up the taxes on the clubs movement, we've seen jobs lost. We've seen $6 million lost, for instance, from junior rugby league because the capacity of clubs to support lots of community groups has been curtailed. And what I know is that clubs and other organisations, not-for-profits, spend money much more effectively than state government ever does, and we saw that best in this state in relation to the BR. So in exchange for a $270 million tax break, we get almost the same money back into community groups, into sporting facilities, into social services across our state.
So you're not going to agree to these pokey reforms, and the government has an agreement with Andrew Wilkie, with the Independent, that if there's no agreement with the states by the end of May, they legislate. The federal government doesn't control gambling. It's got legal advice, though, that it has the means to do it, to force the change on the states. Do you acknowledge that the federal government has that right? Do you acknowledge that legal advice?
I acknowledge that they may have advice, but I acknowledge that advice is simply that till it's tested in the courts.
So if the legislation goes through, you would challenge the validity of it?
I have no doubt that I wouldn't be the only Premier that challenged yet another attempt by the federal government to legislate into areas that have always been the area of state governments.
Have you talked to the other premiers about a potential challenge?
No, but I'm very happy to. We don't. One of the issues, Ali, that we're supposed to be having at some stage this year is a tax summit. One of the taxes I assume that we'll be talking about is not just the GST, not just about those other taxes, but these sorts of taxes, which do have an impact upon state revenues.
So that would bring down a Labor government?
Well, no. What it would do is test a Labor government's legal advice. Look, the worst sort of government you have is what we have in Canberra currently, where you no doubt have a federal Labor government that had clear intentions at the election, that has limped back into office and is now beholden to the sorts of minority interests, disparate minority interests we see there. A Green, an independent from Tasmania, and a couple of renegade Conservative independents here in New South Wales. That's the bed they've decided to get into. It's the bed that they have to decide whether or not they're going to get out of.
Do you support the ads currently on air and done by the clubs?
I support the rights of the clubs movement or any other individual in this society to stand up for themselves.
But are they misleading, those ads? I mean, we don't even have the details yet of the measures, and yet these ads claim that you'll need a licence for gambling. I mean, we don't actually know what you'll need.
Well, just understand, though, that the clubs movement in New South Wales in particular is dealing with a Labor Party that in this state has forced many clubs out of existence, many clubs to merge, tens of thousands of jobs lost and millions of dollars ripped out of the voluntary sector across New South Wales. That's why the clubs movement in New South Wales doesn't trust Labor. It's why good Labor clubs like the president of the Randwick Labor Club, where Christina Keneally had, or was planned to have her celebration election night, has come out and said that they would support the efforts of Clubs New South Wales to oppose these taxes.
So very clearly that will end up in court, and you'll be happy to lead that charge?
Well, very clearly we will seek to defend the proper governance roles of the states. Very clearly we'll seek to stop another incursion by the federal government, but also very clearly, Ali, we will continue to do what we can to deal with problem gamblers across New South Wales.
Health reform is another key issue. The Federal Health Minister, Nicola Roxon, said immediately after the election that she'd be very happy to meet you as soon as possible. Have you had that meeting?
No, but she's been in conversation with Gillian Skinner, our Health Minister. We're keen to do that. What we said during the election campaign, what we said after the Heads of Agreement was signed, was that we would look at the details. That's being done now to ensure that the Heads of Agreement met the needs of New South Wales, that it did deliver that better deal that was talked about. And frankly, what I was arguing during the state election campaign was what other premiers have gone away and done.
So where are you standing right now? Support or not support?
We're happy to support an agreement that delivers better outcomes for New South Wales.
But you can't say if this one does.
Well, but as you know, and as I understand, the Treasurers last week discussed the so-called efficient price, upon which this agreement hinges. Until we get some shape around that efficient price, we won't know whether regional or suburban hospitals are going to be worse off, whether they'll need to be supplemented, and how this new deal is going to work. But ultimately, we understand the need to deliver better health services in New South Wales. We're happy to work with the federal government to do that. We're happy to sign an agreement that delivers on that. But we're not going to sign up to an agreement that doesn't deliver the benefits promised for it.
On a health-related issue, the plain packaging for cigarettes, should Tony Abbott get on board and support the government's move towards that?
Well, look, we said during the campaign that we supported what was being proposed. We've got a discussion paper in New South Wales about further tobacco restrictions, but there does need to be an orderly process in this, because in addition to the health problems, and all governments are hypocritical about this, we know that smoking causes cancer causes death, but nevertheless we all seek to regulate, not outlaw, tobacco products. But there are people out there whose livelihoods, and I'm talking about corner stores, not the big outfits, who need to know that if these changes are going to be made, that there has to be some orderly process to allow them to adjust their affairs.
But do you fundamentally have a difference of opinion with Tony Abbott on that?
I'm sure from time to time we will have differences of opinion with Tony Abbott. I'm the Premier of New South Wales. I'll stand up for the people across New South Wales. Tony wants to be Prime Minister. Tony would be a great Prime Minister of this country, and as Prime Minister of the nation, he has to weigh up the interests not just of New South Wales, but Western Australia, the Northern Territory and other states and territories.
Do you have much in common with Tony Abbott? You've got very different styles.
We're both Liberals. We're both members of the same division of the Liberal Party. He's a better athlete than I am by far. I probably eat better than he does. But I think we share absolutely the same fundamental beliefs. But my approach, Ali, will always be collaborative, because I think that's what suits New South Wales. We've seen...
Do you think his is not so collaborative?
Well, I think Tony operates in a different environment which is pretty brutal, a different environment in which, one slip by the government can see, hopefully, the election of a Liberal National government in exchange. So, different types for different circumstances. And I think Tony's absolutely up to the task. I think Tony can be a good Prime Minister of this country, and he certainly has my support.
Barry O'Farrell, many thanks for joining Lateline tonight.
Thank you, Alan.